I'm Dawn Rubensall. I'm the one who fills your inboxes with emails about college and career. I'm sorry, but I think you'll be glad that you know some of that stuff as you go along. Tonight, here's Dr. Smithberger. Sorry, I thought maybe you were still held up over at Polaris. So tonight, I'm going to start the program with Dr. Gates from College Now. Dr. Smithberger, would you turn up the volume a little bit? Dr. Gates has been with us this whole year, and we're thrilled to have her coming back next year, I hope. She's done a really great job with our students, and she's going to talk about planning for financial aid a little bit so that those of you that have younger than juniors can maybe be thinking about things a little bit differently to get to your greatest advantage in financial aid.
Thank you, Dr. Rubensall. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ann Gates, and I work with College Now. We are a college and career access organization that serves students in 5 counties throughout Northeast Ohio. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to partner with local schools and the counselors and teachers here at Berea Mid-Park High School to assist students with their post-secondary planning. This evening, my focus is going to be on financial aid. Financial aid is the focus of my brief presentation this evening. In the fall, there will be a much more in-depth presentation about planning for college from a financial aid perspective. And at that point, we'll get into a little bit more of the details with respect to the paperwork and the process that goes into that. For this evening, the goal is to give you an overview of the components of financial aid so that you will have a working knowledge of some of the elements for your consideration between now and the start of the senior year for your son or daughter. As it indicates here, our basic definition is that financial aid is money to help students pay for their college education. Some financial aid is free, and some financial aid is not free. But all of this financial aid that we're going to speak about this evening will help in the process of paying for college. When I say post-secondary education, I also want to be very clear that we are speaking of a multitude of opportunities for our rising seniors. We are looking at 2-year colleges such as Tri-C or Lorain County Community College or Stark State College. We're also looking at our 4-year institutions, and for those students who are interested in the trade and technical programs, for example, doing something in the adult program at Polaris, there's also opportunity for financial assistance. When we talk about the costs of college, you will see on colleges' websites what they define as the cost of attendance. That is a very holistic term that is used to describe the direct and the indirect costs that families will pay for education at that institution. Let me just take a few moments to distinguish between these two so that you can think about this with respect to your own planning. The first are the direct costs. As you see here indicated, the first of these are going to be the tuition and fees. And in instances where students will be living on campus, we also have our room and board, so our meal plan and our housing. These are the costs for which students and families will be billed directly from the college or university, and that's going to happen twice a year. Once, generally in July for the fall semester, and then again in December for the spring semester. There is some opportunity in terms of a bit of variability with respect to room and board, for instance. At some colleges and universities, you may find that there are different meal plans or different prices for housing depending on the options that are available. But keep in mind, these costs are going to be billed directly to the family to attend that school. Our second type of costs are the indirect costs. We do need to plan for these, and they will be ones that are going to be part and parcel, if you will, of going to college. You'll see here there are 3 main ones that are highlighted. The first are books and supplies. If you've not priced college textbooks recently, you may be in for a surprise. They are very expensive. And one of the things that we will certainly help students do is to understand the different options where they can access their course materials so they are ready for class and try to save some money in the process. So that's going to vary, of course, depending on the semester, the courses that are taken, and the professor's requirements. Our second set of indirect costs are our personal expenses. Items like clothing, shampoo, the occasional pizza on a Friday night are what we figure into our indirect costs, things that we need for everyday living. And finally, transportation is also an indirect cost. So depending if students are going to be commuting every day, flying across the country, or living at an area or institution, of course, this is also going to vary. What you will find on college and universities' websites are some estimated costs for these indirect numbers. You will see an estimate for books and supplies, personal expenses, and transportation. These are averages, because keep in mind, some of these elements I've just mentioned will vary by person. I have known students over the years who have had very nice college experiences and were quite frugal with their monies. So what the school said was going to be their cost for personal expenses was considerably lower because of their own spending habits. And that's something to think about also at this point in terms of how people would like to budget for their own expenses. So again, these will be listed on the college website, so you'll have an understanding of how they are budgeting on average for students' attendance. There are 3 types of financial aid that I'd like to review with you this evening. The first is gift money, and this is comprised of grants and scholarships. The second is earned money through work study. And the third is borrowed money in the form of education loans, both federal and private. I'm going to speak to each of these in turn. Gift money is in the form of both grants and scholarships. First of all, with respect to grants, these are gifts that are based on financial need. They are operated by both the schools and the federal government. Eligibility for grants is typically determined by a student's FAFSA. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It is paperwork that is submitted in the fall of a student's senior year, and I'll speak to that a little bit more in depth in just a few moments. So the information that is determined from the FAFSA can generate grants, and grants do not need to be repaid. So one example, a common example that you'll hear of a federal grant is called the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is administered by the United States Department of Education, and Congress will reauthorize the Pell Grant, and they did it just a few weeks ago for the coming school year. So students who qualify for the Pell Grant are eligible to receive $6,895 for 1 year of education in the form of grant money that does not need to be repaid. The second type of gift money is in the form of scholarships. This is where we spend a lot of our time, both counselors and College Now, particularly starting in December or so as the scholarship season gets underway in earnest for particularly our local scholarships. So scholarships are offered using a variety of criteria. Scholarships, first of all, may be merit-based, and that will be accomplished through a school's review of a student's admission application, their academic and other achievements, and many accomplishments. A second type of scholarship will be need-based. That is known by data that will be generated from the FAFSA. And the third type will be circumstance-based. What I mean by this is there may be certain qualifications that one has to meet in order to be eligible for certain scholarships. For example, there may be a local scholarship from the Elks Club, and in order to be eligible for that, one has to have a member in the family who has or is a member of the Elks civic organization. There are also ones that are going to be available potentially through your employer. Both students and parents should check with their employers to see if there's any kind of scholarship available through that for employees and or their dependents. So these criteria are ones that you will see both in the, you'll see scholarships that are available through the colleges and universities, and they will give the largest scholarship amounts, but then also through what we're going to call our external ones. And these are ones that Dr. Rubenstahl makes available. We also have some at College Now, and a number of other Northeast Ohio organizations do, along with the national ones. One of the handouts you have received this evening is giving you some data from College Now about some sites to review at your leisure for national scholarship sites. And just like with grants, scholarships do not need to be repaid. There are a few tips I'd like to share now because I do think that summer's a great time to start the scholarship search before the other activities of senior year come into play. So first of all, we recommend that you start to think in very specific terms. There are going to be lots of criteria on which scholarships are going to be available for students. Of course, academic achievement is going to be one of them. There will also be scholarships available for students from certain majors or cohorts. For example, there may be scholarships available for women pursuing STEM majors, for instance. And similarly, there may be also scholarships available for students from historically underrepresented groups. And again, that can vary by a number of criteria. The second tip we recommend is to think on a very local basis. Again, here at Berea Mid-Park, there are a number of local scholarships that are made available to students. Those are advertised via email, and there are a lot of opportunities for them to take advantage of scholarships that are available both throughout Northeast Ohio as well as the state of Ohio. As I mentioned, your place of employment is also another good place to check. We at College Now have a set of scholarships that we make available, and there are criteria that go along with that we are sure that we advertise for students. And also this year, for the first time, College Now was the manager of the Cleveland Foundation scholarships. And if you're familiar with the foundation, they are a long-standing philanthropic organization here in Northeast Ohio. They have had scholarships for a number of years, and this year they asked College Now to manage those. So there's another easy access set of scholarships that we have to share with students. Easily accessible, pardon me. We do like the local scholarships because the applicant pool will be smaller than those of a national search. My sense always is, think of it as an and, not an or. If somebody's winning those national scholarships, it may as well be you. So that was our first type of money, our gift money, which consists of grants and scholarships. Our second type is our earned money, which is federal work study. Federal work study is an on-campus employment system whereby the federal government and the local college will share the cost of employing students on campus to do a whole host of jobs, ranging from dining services to working in professors' offices, perhaps grounds crew, admissions offices. All sorts of places on campus benefit from the value and the talents that the college students bring to their work. Generally, students will work perhaps 15 hours a week. They will be paid typically minimum wage or a bit more, and they receive a paycheck every 2 weeks. So this is money that, when you see it on your financial aid letter, is not deducted from your tuition, but it's money that students will earn over the course of their year, and they're given a certain amount that they can earn through their FAFSA and through the work study. In order to be eligible for work study, one does need to file the FAFSA. So most students will use this money for those indirect expenses that I mentioned. They'll use it for books and supplies, etc. And one of the other elements of work study that is particularly helpful is that although students will report the money that they earned on the FAFSA from work study for the next year, they're not penalized, if you will, for having earned those monies. Our third type of funding is that of loans. So there are two major types. We have our federal student loans, and we have our private or alternative loans. With respect to federal student loans, again, once the FAFSA is completed, students may be eligible for both a direct subsidized loan and a direct unsubsidized loan. The difference between these two is that the subsidized loans are supported by the federal government with respect to paying the interest on the loan during the time that the student is in college and during the 6-month grace period following completion. The unsubsidized loan does not have that level of support. You'll see here the interest rates on both of these loans for this year is 3.73%. That will change because every year in July, as it indicates at the bottom, that is annually reviewed. So we don't know yet the interest rate for the students who are going to school this fall. So we'll have 2 cycles before the current juniors will have that determined. The federal student loans are student loans. There is not a cosigner required for these. And because the federal government knows that they are young adults, there is not a credit check. There's also a federal Parent Plus loan in which the parent is the cosigner, and you'll see the rate on that this year was 6.28%. Why we like the federal loans? Generally, their rates are going to be lower than what you'll find at a private source, and the interest rate is fixed for the life of the loan. And then our second major type are our private or alternative loans, whereby individuals will go to local banking institutions or credit unions or other sources, often to supplement or complement the money from the federal government. The FAFSA is a form that I mentioned earlier, is used to determine eligibility for the loans that I've just mentioned, for Pell Grants, for work study. Also, many colleges and universities will use the FAFSA for determining all of their awards with respect to merit scholarships. So we do recommend that everybody complete the FAFSA. It opens on October 1 each year. So I would anticipate next fall, as we did this year, sometime late semester, there will be a meeting where there'll be more detailed information about planning for college life as a senior, including financial preparations through the FAFSA. So as it indicates here, the Department of Education is responsible for overseeing the FAFSA, and once that form is filled out, which has information about the student and the family, demographically and financially, then it will calculate an expected family contribution. We do recommend that students and families complete the FAFSA as soon as reasonably possible after October 1. One of my responsibilities here at Berea Mid-Park is to work with students and families on completing the FAFSA as requested and as needed. The final comments that I would like to share with you this evening are intended to have us continue to think ahead toward what's coming before that first payment is made at about 15 months from now for college or university. My first recommendation is, as I mentioned earlier, continue to or begin to explore scholarships. Again, that handout may give you a nice starting point. Again, there are also going to be a number of local scholarships. I really recommend that students continue to pay attention to their email, because this is where you're going to find a lot of those opportunities. This would be a good time for students also to check their SAT score. There will be some scholarships that will require an SAT or ACT minimum score. So that's something that if they don't think that their score really reflects their academic strength, they may want to consider retaking. Alternatively, sometimes students will take the SAT, not be particularly wild about that test, and decide to take the ACT. And what we found is that sometimes students do have a clear preference. There are lots of study guides and assistance online, and I do recommend that as students are planning to retake that, in cases where they are, that they take the time to do that preparation work. It can really help pay off. And taking that a second time can also be very beneficial in their scores. Thirdly, I think it's a good time to review family finances and to identify any additional potential area of savings so that people are all prepared when the time comes to pay for college. And again, we've got both our direct costs and indirect costs to consider. A tool I'd like to identify for you, if you're not already familiar with it, is that on colleges' websites you will find a net income calculator. Those can be helpful tools as well to take a look at anticipated costs of college. And again, we're looking at, as we go through the senior year, at how we can reduce the out-of-pocket costs through scholarships and other aid. So that's a primary focus of what we will do next year. And finally, I think it's an excellent time for students to look at, if they haven't already done so, what might be some good summer employment opportunities so that they can begin to think about their own contributions financially to their college education. So I hope this evening that my overview has given you just that, a sense of the landscape of financial aid. I certainly will be available after the presentation if you have any more pointed questions. I'll be happy to answer them. And we can talk more specifically in the fall as you have need and interest regarding completing the FAFSA. At this time, I'd like to turn the podium over to Canon Dees, who is an admission counselor at Baldwin Wallace.
Everyone hear me all right? Cool. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gates, for that nice intro, and thank you, Dr. Rubensall and Berea Mid-Park counselors for inviting me back here tonight. Again, my name is Canon Dees. I work over at BW, right across the street, in the admissions department. So working with the applications, talking a little bit about financial aid with students on a more individual basis. Before I jump into kind of the college application process and talking a little bit about the difference between some public and private universities, I do want to give a quick shout out to College Now and to your counselors. I I know you guys get a lot of emails from a lot of people, but your counselors in college now are a great resource. As we go over this application process, we'll be talking about different dates, different timelines, and you're more than welcome to reach out to individual school counselors, such as myself from BW, but your BMHS counselors in college now are a really great resource that are sometimes underutilized just because students and parents aren't aware. So please, please, please use those resources that are at your school and available to you. With that said, I'd like to jump into the college application process. I know we have some juniors in here, maybe some sophomores, maybe some freshmen. So this is really kind of talking about this summer for you juniors, and for sophomores and freshmen, it's not a bad idea to kind of start doing some of this stuff now. The very first step is to narrow your choices. Big surprise. I like to describe it kind of like a funnel, right? So at the very beginning, you have every college in the world you can look into, but not every college is the right fit for you, right? So how can we start narrowing those choices? How can we start looking at, okay, what is my academic major? What is the location that I want? Where do I want to be? What extracurriculars am I interested in? Am I an athlete? Am I a musician? What kind of opportunities lie in these schools for me? A lot of that information is available on websites, and you can feel free to reach out to them. There are different tools that you can look at to filter out different schools. And of course, your counselors in college now, again, are a great resource. So again, number one, kind of narrowing those choices. I like to say there's no really limit to the number of schools you can be looking at. It could be, I say 10 is a good number, 5 is a good number if that's what you're interested in, up to 15 is a good number too, right? Again, when it comes to application fees and that sort of thing, that's when you kind of gotta weigh your options. But again, just starting to look, there's no limit as to how many you can look at. So the second step is once you kind of get your, let's say, top 10 choices down, let's start to review those admission requirements, right? So what kind of test scores do they need? ACT scores, SAT scores, do they require them? Are they optional? Is it going to help with that financial aid stuff? And every school is different, right? I will tell you in the last couple years, from my experience, a lot of schools are kind of making that ACT, SAT optional. However, there are still a lot of outside scholarships that Dr. Gates was talking about that will look at those SAT and ACT requirements. So again, it's not a bad idea to start looking at them, doing them if you're interested, but just know if you're applying to a school, okay, is it required, is it optional? The second thing is your GPA, right? So transcripts are pretty much a requirement for every college application. So what kind of classes have you been taking? What are your grades looking like? If you're a freshman, hey, this is your call to say, this is why you keep that GPA up from the start. If you're a junior, hey, this is why you've been working on your GPA, right? And how does that affect that financial aid? How does that affect where you're going to apply, right? Do schools have a minimum GPA requirement? And the last thing is curriculum requirements, right? So are you taking a college prep curriculum in high school? What is the school looking for? Are you looking at a specific program at a specific school that requires certain classes for you? So you guys still have time at this point to say, okay, I need this prerequisite to go on my application. Is there any way I can switch into that class, or what other classes can I be taking, right? So just kind of getting an idea about these schools and about their admission requirements. Number 3, an important one, check on those application dates or application deadlines. So when are the applications open? Typically, August 1st is a pretty popular date for applications to open, but when are they due? Are they rolling admission? So for example, at BW, when you submit your application, it'll be about 2 to 4 weeks, and you have the entire year to decide if you'd like to accept that offer. Some schools, you apply in August, they send out one large group decision day, and you have to decide by December 18th. Is that school at the top of your list? Is it at the middle of your list? That's one of the helpful things about having a list and kind of ranking those schools as you're going down and narrowing your choices is, okay, if I get in here and I have to know by this date, here's what I can do, or if I am choosing this school over this school, how do those deadlines line up, right? So making a list, oftentimes students will have a calendar or a separate calendar just for college deadlines. It's a really good idea to have for financial aid deadlines, for admission deadlines, application deadlines, and color code it for applications, financial aid, and that sort of stuff. Early notification as well exists, so it says, okay, we let you know you're in, but we have to know by this date if you're coming in. Early decision is, hey, you've been accepted, we need to know by this date. So again, just kind of checking in on the schools and what each one requires. For that same kind of path, check on those scholarship deadlines, right? So for example, BW, your scholarship lines up with your admission. However, some schools, we need to know by this date if you are coming, which is before the admission deadline, because we need to get these scholarships. So again, each school is a little bit different, so make sure you're just communicating with those admission counselors or checking the website, communicating with your BMHS counselors as well. Number 5, know what's required for each school in terms of the application and of course everything else we talked about. Big one, personal essays. I know when I was in high school, I just kind of wrote an essay and was like, okay, cool, nobody's ever gonna read this, right? Now that I'm on the other side of the table, I promise you, somebody is reading those, okay? So that is kind of your first introduction to who you are. As admission counselors, we might not know who you are when that application comes across. This is the one thing on your application that you really control in terms of writing whatever you want to write about. So that is your place for a story. Please put the time in for your essay and maybe reach out to an English teacher or a trusted teacher, anything like that, trusted adult or parent or professor that you might know to kind of look over that essay, right? Letters of recommendation, not required for all schools. I know at BW they are optional, but they help with an application, right? I recommend submitting 1 to 3 letters of recommendation if you're gonna submit them. It's awesome if you have 7, if you have that many recommendations, that is a lot. So I say 1 to 3 is a good amount. Transcripts, again, pretty much a requirement with all schools. These will typically have to come from your counselor, from your school. So when you're looking at those deadlines, please remember that you and the entire rest of the senior class is also asking for these. So asking for it maybe a month in advance, month and a half, something like that. Give your counselors time to get those sent in, right? Because I know there's a lot coming. Right, Dr. Rubensall? Last piece is school report form. Not every school will require these. I know BW does, and some other schools do as well. This is just a report that has information about your school and information about you from the school. Again, kind of with school report form, what I like to talk about is sometimes schools have varying requirements, right? It's not copy and paste for every school. So I like to use that as my miscellaneous letter as well, just because make sure you know what's gonna be on that application. The last piece are auditions, not applicable to everyone, but this could also include interviews for certain schools with certain programs, right? So make sure you have those audition dates lined up and you're making sure your application is in before then so you can register for those auditions. 6, submit your applications and materials, everything we just talked about, right? So you got your deadline set up, you got your essay done, transcripts in, school report form in, it's time to submit those. There are 2 types of application. One is the common application. I'm not sure how many of you guys have heard of it at this point. If you have an older sibling that has gone through the college process, you probably have. Common application is one application you fill out once, and then you can send it out to any school that takes that common application. It's very easy to do, and it saves a lot of time if you're applying to a lot of schools, right? The flip side of that is the individual school application. Pretty straightforward. It will ask what you need with the essay and all that sort of stuff. It is up to you what you want to do. You can check the school's website or ask the admission counselor if they have a preference. I will tell you most schools do not have a preference. Whatever is easier for you is easier for us, right? We don't want you stressing out over that application because we want you guys to apply. So those are all kind of the individual steps, but when should we be doing this stuff, right? So this summer, I know, like, what can we do now? Start narrowing your choices, right? Looking at that filter we were talking about, talking to your counselors, checking out different websites. If you've heard of a school, maybe look at the website for 20 minutes and see, okay, do they have this? Do they have that? This looks interesting. Do they have my major? Or if they don't have my major, how many majors do they have? How many options do I have? How easy it is to switch in and out of majors if I want to try something and might not like it. And that will take you to about August 1st. So that's what we were talking about. A lot of applications will open August 1st. Commonly, August through November is that time to apply. Getting all that stuff in, that's where a lot of those deadlines will fall, is between August and November. Again, this is a general timeline. Every family, every student is different, whether you're an athlete or a musician, or you're just taking your time and really exploring your choices. So please don't feel like you have to stick to this, but this is a pretty popular one and one that can get you where you need to go. So again, August 1st, November 1st apply. October 1, Dr. Gates talked about the FAFSA. Please file your FAFSA, okay? It's free to do, and there's a lot of resources to help you with filling out that FAFSA if you have questions. I won't go into any more detail about it, but I know the school does a file the FAFSA night. There's a lot of resources out there to help you with that, so please do not be intimidated by it. Another common misconception with the FAFSA is people will fill it out and assume that means they have to take out loans. It is not true. You are not automatically signed up for loans when you fill out the FAFSA, but it will show you what you're eligible for. So if you don't want to take out loans, that's okay. Still file the FAFSA. October through January. This is when those admission decisions start rolling in, right? Winter break's coming up, a nice little Christmas gift from all the colleges. Wow, congratulations, you're in. Awesome. So now you can really start narrowing those choices down. Okay, so I applied to 10 schools. I got into my top 8. Perfect. What am I looking at now? What are those next steps? How can we narrow it down even further? What does that financial aid look like, right? And that will take us to the December to March era. Financial aid. So October 1st, you fill out that FAFSA. Perfect. The financial aid offers start to roll in sometime mid-December, late December, all the way to March. So now you're looking, okay, here's how much this school costs, here's how much this school costs. I like this one a little bit more, it's a little more expensive. Is the opportunity cost worth it? That sort of thing. So December through March, you're kind of evaluating those prices with the financial aid. Through March and April, this is when you go back to revisit. So the first time you visited, you're a prospective student, you're kind of there wide-eyed, not really knowing specifically if you're gonna be at this school, kind of seeing yourself there. March and April, you're going back to those top 3, top 4 schools. You're like, yes, you have made the cut. I'm very interested. Here's what it's coming down to. Here's what my decision is gonna come down to. What kind of answers do you have for these questions, right? And then May 1st is our decision time. So that's National College Decision Day. Some schools will have a hard deadline on May 1st to say you need to tell us if you're coming here by May 1st. Some schools like BW will say, hey, we want you to know by May 1st, but if not, that's okay, take your time into the summer, right? But generally May 1st is a good time if you're thinking, well, when should I decide? May 1st is a good date to just kind of keep in the back of your head. So that kind of wraps up the college application process. For questions, I will be hanging out during the presentation, after the presentation, and we can kind of talk about questions there. I do know Dr. Rubensall had the question to have me talk a little bit about public versus private in a very stereotypical kind of address of public versus private, because like I said, every school is a little different. Public typically is going to be a little bit bigger. So to give you a rough estimate, somewhere between 10 to 30,000 students. Again, very stereotypical, each school is different. Private is a little bit smaller, so maybe 1,000 to 7,000, 8,000, depending on the school. BW, just to give you kind of an idea, because I know we're all from the area, is about 2,700 students, right? So if you're looking for that kind of size, BW is a good place, even for a practice visit. I like to say if you're looking for something in the summer, you're like, all right, I want to do a dry run up a campus visit, sign up for one at BW and come check us out. We'll kind of walk you through what you need to do if it's your first visit as well. The other big piece I wanted to talk about is the financial aid. A lot of times what you'll see is public universities or colleges will have a very low tuition compared to private universities. And that's awesome, that's great. What I will tell you though is that private universities typically have more money to give out in terms of financial aid. So I look at financial aid offers from other schools. Not that it's guaranteed to be lower than a public university, but when you file that FAFSA, that information is very useful to the financial aid committees at the university to say, okay, we understand kind of your situation now, here's your updated offer. That's when it becomes a little more comparable to those public universities, right? So if you have your heart set on going to a smaller university, but you look at that financial aid, you look at that tuition, you're like, oh boy, that's a big investment. Because trust me, I know it is a big investment. Don't be deterred to say, oh, I can't go there, it's gonna be too expensive. Maybe once that financial aid season hits and you kind of talk to the counselor, talk through some other things, that's when you can really start ruling out schools potentially based on finances. But please don't look at a school and say, oh, that's too expensive, we're not even gonna apply there, we're not even gonna look, right? A lot of these schools will typically work with you as well on a family basis. Does that kind of cover it? All good? My information is right here. Like I said, I am right across the street, so if you ever have questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, if you're interested in BW, please feel free to give me a call. Or if you just have general college questions, please feel free to reach out to me as an extra resource as well. Thank you guys again for your time and listening, and if you have any questions, you know how to get me. Thanks.
Cannon didn't mention he is a graduate of the Berea Schools, and we're very proud of him and excited to exploit the connection as much as we can. So he's been in our buildings a lot. A lot of your students have probably met with him, especially if they're an avid. But he's very knowledgeable, and I think what happened this year, the last couple years, is our students traditionally didn't look at Baldwin Wallace very much because it's right across the street. Then COVID hit, and they realized that they didn't know if they wanted to live in a dorm, and so they started to look at it a little bit more carefully, and we went from 4 or 5 students a year going there to about 30 the last couple years. They have a lot of nationally ranked programs, and I think the other thing that happened is the students are using our Naviance program, and that tells them where the programs for their certain major have a strength, what colleges are, that's a strength, and so they're finding Baldwin Wallace through the internet instead of walking across the street. In light of what's going on in the world, I thought that it'd be worth it to throw a slide in just to let you know what I'm doing with your students so that there's full disclosure and so that you can also help me. I joked about the emails, and I do know I send a lot of them, but I found the first year that I did this job that the students weren't coming to things and weren't applying for things. Then when I added the parent button, a lot more things started to happen. And so thank you in advance for scanning those emails. I've had more limited things going on because of COVID and not being sure what the restrictions are, but in the years to come, I assume I'll be able to have more career speakers and things like that. So this is probably not a great list of the things that you can expect if you have a younger student, but I only get about 9 to 10 students at most of these presentations, the career presentations, during lunch. So please encourage your student, if they're looking at the major that I'm bringing in from the college, to come and spend half of their lunch and learn so that they can get the advantage of my services. So what I have are a lot of slides I won't spend a lot of time on, but I do want you to know what I've told your students already. So I've talked to all of the English classes this year. As of January, I had seen all of the students who have English on our campus. The students who didn't, I emailed the information, and I'm also available during lunch and learn every day, actually right outside here. So encourage your student, if they have a question, to come and see me. I typically spend a lot of time by myself after November 1st. So until November 1st, it's kind of crazy with the seniors getting the applications done. After that, it's really wide open. So I talked to the students about the full spectrum of their choices, so that they know what their options are 100%. We used to just push college, but we all know that the landscape has changed and it may not be the best path for all the students. So I talk about apprenticeships and military, career and technical schools. I talk a lot about how they can use Lorraine County Community College and Tri-C to save money. Whether it's through CCP or for using it as a transfer school. So I do try to make sure that they have all their options so that they make good choices. I do think, though, if you have a junior, you should have your student apply for college in that September to November 1st time frame. And then if they decide that's not the path for them, they're out $50, but if they change their mind and they decide they want to go to college now, there are schools, obviously, that are taking applications, but some of them may have already given out most of their financial aid, and so better to have an option out there and not need it than to be, scrambling right now. I actually had a student in my office today who all of a sudden, now that the friends are talking about going away to college, wants to apply. So better to do that when everyone else is. So where do you begin? If you are in 9th or 10th grade, you did your career assessment with me, and we talked about this being the beginning of narrowing. Cannon used the word funnel, so I think you do the same thing with careers. I often say to the students, try to figure out what you don't like. That actually takes a pretty good chunk of the jobs off the table. Favorite subjects in school sometimes can help. We talk about DNA because a lot of times people follow their family through a career. They know a lot about it from the dinner table, and maybe they actually have some aptitude just genetically, So they shouldn't rule that out, although it shouldn't drive all of the decisions either, of course. Hopefully we'll be able to do a lot more career shadowing in the future. That's a great way for students to rule out careers. And then I tell the students, if you like everything, or you don't have a really strong desire to do anything in particular, do something medical or tech, because, of course, in this area, lots of jobs, they pay well, and we have a lot of schools around here that can train the student for those. I do talk about joining the workforce, but I also tell a student if that's their plan, they need to get a lot more training before they leave here and pick classes that are going to help them build their resume, because I don't want them to just start in an entry-level job. We're hoping that as we continue to build this program, students who go into the workforce have some skills that are marketable and a nice resume. On April 1st, I had 50-some employers here, and a lot of the students walked around and gave their resumes. I created resumes from a Google form, and part of the reason I did that was for some of them to see they didn't have much to put on there, so that they would start to be thinking about that. So maybe volunteer somewhere this summer, get a job, or learn a skill. So I just wanted them to have some awareness of that. And then, of course, we always talk about apprenticeships as a good way to get their leg up. Tri-C and LCCC have great programs. So I'm pushing those things for those students that aren't really interested in attending a four-year college. There are some technical schools that a lot of times the students overlook. Just a couple of them are listed here: Hocking, University of Northwestern Ohio. Ohio State has an agricultural school. We've had several students go over there for the landscape turf management program to work on golf courses. So depending on what the kids are interested in, there are a lot of options that students don't typically explore. Do be careful about for-profit schools. If your student is looking at those, please run those by me, because twice now in my career I've had students that just got locked out overnight with no warning. So most of the time LCCC and Tri-C can do a lot of the same training, sometimes cheaper, and definitely it's more reliable. I have a lot of links. This is why I gave you the QR code for the slideshow. So you'll see a lot of links that you can go back and revisit. Military, I talked to the students about all the different ways that they can use the military, and we're very excited. Of course, I'm sure we've been bragging all month, but we do have a student that got into the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, and that's at least $500,000 worth of free education and training right out the gate. So it is doable. We have had students get into all of these academies in my career at Berea Schools. So it is doable. But for those of you that are younger, you need to start now, not just on the physical part of it, but you also need to build a resume, get excellent grades, take a really rigorous curriculum, because those are highly selective universities. All right, so I do talk to the students who are interested in any of the types of enlistment or ROTC or academy programs to know that they should be aware of not getting tattoos. I read recently that 19% of our students can't qualify for the military because of obesity. So I tell them, if you're interested in this as an option, you need to start young. And if you want to get into a military academy, you'll need an endorsement from a representative, so that might not be a bad place to look for some volunteering or a part-time job. ACT and SATs, if you have a junior, how many people have juniors in here? Okay. Your students should just have seen their ACT, or their SAT populate in their transcript probably within the last week. So I haven't actually had a chance to analyze that, but if your student's really thrilled with their score, they don't need to take more tests, but I would say if they scored very well, I think they should continue to take the test until they top out, because there's a lot of scholarship money attached to those scores if they're doing very well. If your student's test score ends up being pretty terrible and it's hurt their self-esteem, then I don't think you push them to work on their SATs or ACTs. I think instead you push them to get excellent grades and keep building their resume instead. But I haven't talked at all about test optional, test free, test blind, any of that stuff with any of the juniors, sophomores, or freshmen intentionally, because I don't want them to rely on that if they have the potential to score really well. There also are differences between the tests, so sometimes our strong math students score a little better on SAT, but not always. And our students that really aren't strong in math, they often score better on the ACT. We only pay for that one test junior year, which is the SAT. So younger students, you can start testing now, but you have to pay for it. And if you're a junior and you look at your score and you think, I want to keep working on this, you want to register yourself for those other tests. We have on our website a lot of free websites where you can do some test prep, and then of course, a couple times a year, Dr. Smithberger generously uses his funds to supplement the fee for that test prep so that it keeps it low for you. So we really appreciate that. It's a pretty good chunk of his money, but that's how much he believes in it, and I do too. I've sat through it many, many times, and that company does an excellent job. Little corny on the jokes, but I think that's the point, just to keep the kids paying attention. But he gets results. So please use our website. We'll continue to keep that updated, and as we know about things, we will add them. Well, and Cannon talked about this a little bit. If your student is going to try to use the military for SEAL, state SEAL for the graduation requirement, they need to get that paperwork to me by April 1st of their senior year. Sometimes we have juniors that enlist, and so they could get that paperwork done early if they need to. Just don't forget to do that. Sometimes students will wait really long to apply to the 2-year in technical schools, and I think they lose out on some opportunities, especially I know Tri-C sometimes will give out a scholarship in December to anyone who is registered, but our students tend to wait too long, so I think they should go ahead and apply to these schools right along with the students with the 4-year schools, or do both, just in case. Cannon already covered this 4-year college deadline. We try to get everything done by Halloween so that if there's a deadline of November 1st, everything's been submitted. So we ask for the middle of October for things to be turned in. That way there I can check if the teacher didn't follow through, I can go bug them so it doesn't ruin the relationship the student has with the teacher. And also, I learned recently within the last year that about 60% of the students that get admitted to colleges get admitted in their first open deadline. So if you get in by November 1st, you beat most of the deadlines. Be careful though, for some pharmacy schools and some PT schools, they might have a earlier even than November 1st deadline. So if you have a younger student, they should probably start taking note of that so that they can make sure that they meet that deadline. I gave a lot of links for Tri-C and LCCC so that students can just bounce in here. Obviously, I talk about the cost savings. If a student can start at a 2-year school, they can save about $10,000 a year just in the tuition, but not always is that the best option. Sometimes there are stackable classes where, say, Education 101 has to be done before 201, before 301, between 401. So now if you do a 2-year school and you don't start that stack of classes, now you've got 6 years of college, not necessarily all full-time, obviously. But if you can do this where you put the 2-year and the 4-year together, by taking most of the stuff that Tri-C and maybe Education 101 or engineering or nursing, the first couple levels, say at BW, Cleveland State, Akron, then you can graduate in 4 years, still save a lot of money. That's a change in my career, that colleges allow you to be enrolled in more than one at the same time. And so we can become much more creative if we think about it like that. And that still gets the student out. If they want to do the cost savings for 2 years at a community college and then transfer to a 4-year school, they still should be from 9th grade until November 1st of their senior year trying to figure out what that 4-year school is so that they can go to the admissions counselor at LCCC or Tri-C and tell them, I'm going to go to Kent State, and then they can make sure that they take the exact right classes throughout that program so that it transfers neatly. For those of you my age, you might remember a lot of people went to community college and then they had to start all over, or a lot of their credits didn't transfer. That is not the game anymore. The state said no to that a long time ago, so things do transfer pretty smoothly. And I can help the student to make those kind of choices. Baldwin Wallace was way out in front of a lot of the universities in making partnerships, so you will find that a lot of other universities around here have partnerships with LCCC and Tri-C to get affordable degrees right at their campuses too. So there are a lot of different ways to use the community college to make college more affordable. There are so many four-year colleges, it's overwhelming. So what I tell the students is if you can narrow your career pathway to Science E or maybe a liberal arts kind of pathway, that helps you to sort the schools down. Like maybe think about how big you want the school to be or how far from home. Those are the kind of things that help the student to sort the very large number of schools down into a manageable pile so that you could get to the 3 to 10 universities that Cannon spoke about. There's a lot of research that says that students that apply to 10 schools are more likely to matriculate to a college, so we do push the 10, but at least 3, I think. So what do you do? For all grade levels, your students will tell you, I talked about grades and attendance, those things go to the college on the transcript. I think attendance for students that are going to have to work their way through matters to the employers. When I was on the other side in the business world, I know that mattered a lot to us, the attendance. Building a resume makes a big difference. The Common Application has many categories: awards, volunteerism, activities, and so the student might want to have something to put in a few of those categories, right? So younger students want to start thinking about that now. It's not too late to get involved, and using your summer, as Dr. Gates said, is really important. And taking the most rigorous courses is really also very important. You're not going to get free education for very much longer, so you might as well suck us dry. Take as many things as you can, learn as much as you can while it's free. We talked about reach, match, and safety. I was pretty excited the other day. One of the seniors was talking about reach, match, and safety with me, so he's heard it enough. I was glad about that because that's really important. I have in the past had students that were really strong students who thought, I'm number 1 in the class, I'm going to get into CASE, and then they didn't, and they didn't have any other place to go. So students need to have at least a couple safe schools, especially ones that are affordable, a couple that their GPA and test scores match up pretty well, and then some reach schools just to see, right? And sometimes those reach schools are more affordable, as Cannon explained, because those colleges can give out a lot of money. I ask the students and parents to not think about money in the college search process until like January of senior year. Between freshman year and then, you're just trying to find the major that might fit for you and the college that has it. That's another thing. A lot of college students apply to colleges that don't even have anything they're interested in, and that doesn't make any sense. So hopefully I can help them with that. Then, once you know how much the college is going to cost, then it's all about money. So seniors are in the all about money phase now. And I tell them not to get their heart set on any college until they know they can afford it. But it never hurts to put your hat in the ring and see what comes of it. As I mentioned a little bit about this already, but it's not just about major. There are other elements to fit, I think, that students need to think about. Some of the students that are living around here have never been in the country, so that may be exciting for them. It may be terrible for them. Whether they take your AP credits or your CCP credits might be a big decider for you. So students, get on the campus. I agree with Cannon. Go see Baldwin Wallace. It's really easy to make an appointment, hop over there, take a tour, spin around Cleveland State. Those are 2 really different schools. And I think if you start there, you don't have to take a road trip and have a hotel, but you've got a really nice jumping off point so that you can start to figure out what you like. over the years, I've heard often 80% of the decision is going on the campus, walking around and just feeling like you're at home. I don't know if that's actual research, but the colleges often say that. I think it's probably fairly true. So how do you know that you'd be a perfect fit for Columbia until you go see Columbia, right? It sounds awesome though, right? So I did introduce all of your students to this program, Naviance. It's a pretty easy program for them to get into now. It used to be a nightmare, but this year we got it worked out so that it's just an app on their Chromebook. So they can do tons of things in Naviance, and this is where younger students should be starting. Put some things in, play with it. You can save the searches. You can do hundreds of searches. It's free. They have a lot of fun tools. The scattergram tool is fun because there's a little mark on each college for every student who from Berea Mid-Park has applied, and you can see yourself on the graph so you know if the students that were in your range are likely to get in or not. So I think that these tools are really underutilized, and so parents and guardians, if you want, force your student to show you how to play with it, and then maybe that's a really fun activity for one night when it's raining and they have nothing to do. But use it, use it, use it. We have a lot of college search items, but also a lot of really good career things in there for the students. The first and so far only virtual college fair is coming up on April 26th. You got an email a while back. This is an opportunity for you to actually interact with the admissions people at the colleges. When COVID hit and they went virtual, I was suspect about these, and then I started joining them because I had nothing else to do. And I would be, for an hour, I could go to 7 or 8 of them, because once you talk to the people, then you just move to another room. And so you could really cover a lot of ground on April 26th. So I highly suggest that you do at least spend an hour or two on this virtual fair. It really does help to register in advance so that you can jump right in and start. But that's a really nice way, especially if your student wants to look at places that are far away, to save you the trip. If you get on there and you find out it's not at all for them, you don't have to drive 6 or 8 hours. The college landscape's always changing. In the last couple years, because of COVID, a whole lot of things have changed. So if you have older students, you're gonna find that you thought you knew the college application process, but maybe not anymore. A lot of schools didn't meet their goals last year, and they were still open for business and for new applicants even after May 1st. But others got a lot more applications, so it's not very predictable. I would say that if we stick to what we were doing all along by getting everything in early, but keeping in mind that maybe after every admission decision comes in, if you can't afford any of them, you still have options out there. That would be a good way to look at it. I think that college admissions is a little more mysterious to me in the last 2 years than it was 3 years ago. I'm learning along the way. It's nice to talk to people like Hannon that are in the trenches to see what's going on, and I think we're going to settle in at some point. So if you're a younger student, I think by the time you are seniors, we might know how to play the game a little bit better, but right now I'm doing the best I can to just kind of make my best guesses for students. So it does come down to, I think, meeting one-on-one with me and looking at your interests and your financial situation and maybe how far away you want to go, and making an individual plan. And that's probably the way to go. I am happy to meet with families and students, so just email me your availability and I will set that up. Students, I'm always available to. They just have to walk up and start talking to me. All right, so Ohio. Ohio is all about retention. This is I don't know, I think maybe 5 years ago everything started being about retention. State funding is tied to the graduates that the state colleges have. So they're very selective in some ways than they used to be. They don't take as many chances with the student who started out pretty poorly. If they only have one good semester, They're looking for a trend, an upward trend now, but I don't think that the last semester senior year is the trend they're looking for anymore. I think now they're looking for them to kick into gear and take seriously school a little earlier. They're also I think the four-year schools are kind of looking at the community colleges as the first step for those students that didn't start out very strongly at the high school level. So you might see that in the process. Ohio isn't funding their schools as well as some states. In fact, a lot of years, Eastern Michigan is the cheapest Ohio school because Michigan funds their colleges a lot better than Ohio sometimes. It once in a while isn't the case, but we have a reciprocity agreement. University of Toledo lets Michigan students in at state prices, and Eastern Michigan does that for Ohio students. So check out Eastern Michigan if price is not looking great, as kind of look at it almost like an Ohio school. So Cannon said that grades matter, and when a college doesn't use test scores, that is one of the things they rely on most heavily. The other thing is the rigor of the courses on your schedule. So gone are the days of an easy senior year. If you take an easy senior year, you might have just cooked your goose. So don't do that. Don't encourage your students to have a fun senior year. They can have fun in the summer, but they need to take a rigorous course list of courses. They need to do well in them. I tell the students, take the hardest classes that you can do well in. If you're not being challenged, let's bump you up. Leadership, that's how they can tell that from sports and activities. That the essay can help to give the college that idea. I do have up here in red the test optional, test blind, and test free. And I will explain that in a lot more detail in the fall for those of you that have rising seniors. But some schools are only test optional for certain programs. 100% of the schools in Ohio this year were test optional. But if you were maybe to be an engineering student at Denison, they might have required the test score. So you had to look in there's some fine details that you really need to look at. Recommendations is an interesting thing. If you've been following the news, there's a lot of research that they've been talking a lot about recently, that recommendations are slanted toward the upper class and upper middle class. I think it's probably because they have more counselors per student so that they can write a little bit better letters, and the teachers don't have as many students to write for either. Either way, I think what I've seen in my career is everyone required 2 recommendations. Now many of the schools are backing off and they're not even taking any recommendations. So you have to look though. Case Western Reserve still does require 2, and so sometimes my students put in an application and never followed through with the recommendations, so then they wouldn't be admitted. So you have to really be careful. I put in these charts just for you to look at. These are typical profiles from this class that's just entering college, and you can look at these slides yourself to get an idea. Ohio State is still the most selective of the 4-year state schools that has continued to get more and more selective, but there is an opportunity for students to get into Ohio State through the Mansfield campus if they don't have strong grades and test scores, so it's still a possibility to get into some of the schools through the back door, and I can help with that. So if you're a 9th or 10th grader, I told you, your students, that you need to get good grades, start building a resume, looking at colleges, maybe even if you're a strong student, start taking ACTs and SATs, but it's not necessary. But some of the time the students are more anxious about it, and it might just be worth it to get a score out there so that they know. And I always tell the student, if someone in your household's going on a college visit and you're younger, jump in the car, might as well. It doesn't hurt to see. For the juniors, they have a much greater number of things to worry about, but I think mainly I want them to start narrowing down their potential majors and stay strong on their grades. And if they know they need a teacher recommendation, I'll be encouraging them when I go back into their classes after AP testing this May to ask a teacher before the summer, because then the teachers can do that for their summer, and the letters will be a lot stronger when they're all fresh. I also talked to the students about making sure that they check their emails. They miss a lot of opportunities because they don't. So if you would, that would be a great thing for the adults in their lives to help with, is set some reminders for them, and then they won't miss the scholarship deadline or maybe the admissions deadline. I think they don't study for their standardized tests the way that they should. A lot of them just take the prep class, or they think that if they study on Thursday and Friday night, Saturday morning, they're going to crush it. So please maybe consider setting up a work schedule for them where they do some of that, because I think we have a lot more potential high scorers out there than we get because the students aren't studying. If you have a junior, they should probably be thinking about those essay questions which have already been released. They don't have to necessarily write those essays yet, although we did have a workshop a couple weeks ago that they could start working with us because we were getting a lot of questions. We have some people here that really do a nice job, I think, of helping the students to narrow the topics and do a pretty good job of editing. But I would say, and Cannon can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the passion that they're looking for. So please, parents, don't let your voice overpower your students. I can tell, I was an English teacher before I was a counselor, and I can tell when it's the parent voice instead of the student voice, and Cannon is shaking his head. So that's a really important thing. And this is no lie. I just got a list of the applications that were submitted from Berea Mid-Park High School to Tri-C this week, and one of them is in the name, the first name of the mother and the last name of the student. So I guess I know who filled out that application, right? That's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to me that they did that. So please let your students fill out their own scholarship and college applications. There are obviously lots of benefits to training and education, and you can do the research on this. All you have to do is Google. I do want you to know about a resource that I rely on pretty heavily. This is just an example of the communications jobs, and you can't see it probably, but if you have it on your phone, you can check it out. But the Occupational Outlook Handbook gives you a lot of information about certain majors, where in the United States there are going to be openings, projected, how much they can make. So it's a really valuable tool, and you get this kind of thing by career cluster or by specific jobs. So please check that out. Naviance also has some of that information in it. So I decided at this point that if your student is definitely not interested in highly selective colleges, that I didn't want to make you feel like you had to stay for this part, because if I were you, I would say it's nice out, I'm gonna go take a walk. So you're welcome, and I would not be offended if you get up and you walk out because this isn't something you're interested in. For those of you that are 9th through 11th graders that want to try to get into a selective college though, I want you to know that we have had students get into many of the highly selective schools, and fairly recently we have a student who is graduating from Wellesley this year, one from Mount Holyoke. We have one that is at Princeton right now. Let's see. I've had students get accepted into almost every single one of these schools just since I came into the Berea City Schools. So there are a lot of options for students, and I think that we have the quality student that could get into a highly selective school. I do want to caution you, though, there's no guarantee, even if you have the most amazing resume, that you're going to get into one of these schools, even if you apply to all of them. And also, there's a lot of pressure on the students. When I wasn't the college counselor, I talked to some of my really strong students who felt a lot of pressure from their families to go to a highly selective college, and it was really deteriorating their mental health. So you have to balance that too. So I say, put in the applications, do the work to build your resume so that you're a candidate, but then when all is said and done, if you get into one of these highly selective schools and you can find a way to pay for it, do a little bit more searching within yourself. We did have recently a student pass up Princeton for Ohio State because it just was such a stressful thought for them to be that far from home. So know your student and let them make that choice, but we'll help them along the way. This is where a body of work is going to be more important than just loading up on activities. The colleges are looking for a student who's been a leader out the gate. If they have a skill, I'm looking at a parent who had a student who had an amazing musical talent, and she was able to get some amazing opportunities because of that. But she didn't do that because she was trying to get into a highly selective college. She did that because she loved that instrument and she was willing to put the effort in. So if your student has an interest that's unusual, or they're just way more strong, a better contender in any type of an activity, then let's nurture that, especially if you're one of the younger students out there. But don't pressure your student to join 50 clubs, because the colleges can see right through that. And especially you don't want to do that if they're juniors, because the colleges know for sure you only did it for that reason, right? You do want to, if you're looking at selective schools, push on those test scores as much as you can to see if you can't get a pretty strong score. You don't have to have a strong test score to get into an Ivy League or a highly selective college necessarily, but if you have one, it's not a bad thing to send, right? There is a school of thought that being well-rounded isn't really what's rewarded in this process. There are a lot of people now that are writing books that I've been reading that talk about having a spike. If you watch the Olympics, you probably noticed a lot of students that were Stanford or Harvard or Yale that were skiers and swimmers. And for kicks, I was looking up a couple of the schools and noticed that there aren't really any ice skating teams. So they were rewarding these people for their fame and their skill, but they weren't going to participate in that on the campus. So you don't necessarily have to match with that. But if you are trying to develop a skill that's marketable at the Ivy League, the two things that I've learned from the recruiters that they are always looking for are crew members with the rowers and the, oh my gosh, I lost the word for it. The sword fighters, what are they called? The fencers. So if you want to try to get your student to have a spike in fencing or crew, that might not be a bad idea because there are a lot of positions on their teams that they need to fill. AP and CCP classes may or may not transfer to these schools, but they do look good to the schools. So you may take 7 or 8 AP classes, score really well, and then maybe go to Barnard, and they don't give you any credit for them, but they do expect you to take that kind of rigor. So just know that going in. One of the ways to show them who you are is to attend their summer programs. Most of the schools do offer those. You don't have to specifically go to Princeton's summer program, but you would want to go to a program that's pretty rigorous. Unfortunately, a lot of those do cost some money. So sometimes you have to invest on the front end. At least visit the school once if you can. Now, if it's like, across the ocean, they're not going to expect you to do that. But if it's a reasonable drive, they are kind of going to wonder why you didn't, if you could make that road trip pretty easily. And then that gives you the opportunity to talk to the people and make a good impression. Make sure that whenever you go on these campuses, you sign in, because they track that. So don't just buzz through Harvard. Take the time to make an appointment in advance and do an official trip if you want to get some credit for having been there. I gave you a couple of different sites that you can use to compare these highly selective schools, and you can hit on those links. Also in Naviance, you can set it up so that it pushes out the selective schools. I gave you these slides. They're a little blurry because I tried to make them bigger, but when you download the slides, I think you can shrink them yourself so that you can read it a little better. But it gives you a pretty good idea of how likely it is for students to get in. And remember that 60% of the applicants get in on the first round of acceptances at a college. So if you're thinking you want a selective college, you really need to get in that first batch to improve your chances. There's this weird thing, and actually Mr. Draves, our assistant superintendent, sent me an article that I read today that just verifies what is on this slide. How you define highly selective is a lot of people need to apply to the school, and they have to be able to say no to most of them, and that's what makes them highly selective. So that's really what that means, right? When U.S. News and World Report and all of those different places start to evaluate the schools and compare them, they're using parameters that kind of overlap. Maybe they're geared toward the older schools that have a lot of alumni participation and things like that. So don't say, I'm not going to apply to this school because it's ranked number 8, especially if it has your major. So one of the big things that they do use, though, in those reports is this yield rate. So they want a lot of people to apply, but they want to say yes to very few. But from that very few, they want most of them to attend, and that's the yield rate. So does that make sense, or should I say that again? Does it make sense? It looks like people are nodding. So that yield rate is an element that the colleges, the highly selective colleges, look at very carefully. So I actually had an amazing math student. He ran out of math by 7th grade, and he was a perfect candidate for the University of Michigan, and he didn't get in. And so I called, and they said, well, he's such a great applicant. We're sure that Ohio State's going to offer him a lot. So we think he's going to go there. And I said, well, you're his number 1. And so they admitted him, and then guess where he went? Ohio State gave him a lot more money. So they were right all along, right? So the colleges do a lot of research on this. But just know what the game is. Know that your chances are a little bit slim, but that we have gotten students into these schools. So it's not 0. So please don't discourage your student from trying, but maybe keep them more reasonable about their chances so that they don't get devastated. So I gave you some different admission rates so that you can kind of see which ones are easier to get into, easier, right? And harder. I do want you to read any agreements that your students were thinking about signing very carefully. It used to be that early decision and early action were very different, and it was obvious what one meant. One early decision used to mean, if you sign this agreement, you have to go to that school. And early action just meant, you're really on my top of the list, but maybe I won't be able to afford it or have a better offer, Now, the early actions sometimes read like the early decisions do. So before you sign anything, make sure that you know what you're getting into. And then luckily for us, Common App is set up so that we have to also authorize early decision. So say Jacob says, I'm going to go to Carnegie Mellon early decision. I'm going to call home and see that his parents know that, and I'm going to have a conversation with him, and we're going to read the agreement carefully together before I authorize it, just to protect everybody so we know what we're getting into. Demonstrated interest was a new game in the last 10 years. The colleges track everything. It's so easy with electronics now. So every time you go on the website or your student goes on the website, they know it. Every time you come on their campus, if you ask the admissions people a question, if they come here in the region and you meet with them, they're tracking that. And they found that the more touches you have with them, the more likely you are to say yes on that yield thing. So that's something that you want to make sure that you're being aware of. That's why you want to sign in, have an official visit at those universities. So that's a lot, right? If you're one of the younger students here, I think you want to figure out what you're good at and then develop that skill. If you're one of the juniors and you've already done that, then let's just make sure that we find a way to communicate that on the application really clearly. And Dr. Smithberger is actually very well versed in all of this. I've learned a lot since he came here about this topic, so also pick his brain. Please do the evaluation. I changed this up a lot this year just to try to meet some of the younger people's needs and to make sure that parents and guardians know exactly what we're doing here, because it's important for us to work together. All right, have a good evening.